Hello everybody, this is Eli and welcome back to Elfbait. So, one of my favorite topics and things to do as a DM is creating new monsters. I know I've talked about monster homebrew stuff in some previous videos, and I touch on it pretty frequently, peppered throughout. But I wanted to talk today about really two things. Some things you can do to create really straightforward, simple monsters that can fill niches, but also to dispel some of the feelings that homebrew monsters are hard to make or they're somehow tricky, that they require a lot of work. And hopefully some of the little tips and stuff that I've come up with and that me and my friends have worked into our games. Actually, we had to talk about this today at work. A lot of the videos are inspired by work chatter. So first of all, I want to talk about how hard it is or not, how hard it is not to work in new monsters or to create monsters that you have seen elsewhere and bring in. So whenever you're approaching a new monster in a game, I always think about it from the standpoint of, first of all, is there already something like this? Because a lot of times your monster visually is the only thing different. The only thing, the visuals of a monster are the only things that make it different from an existing monster in the game. And a lot of times, this is true of a lot of humanoids. This is true of a lot of beasts. The more magical and fantastic the creature, the harder it is to find something that's close. But you'd be surprised. It is not uncommon to find things that have similar attributes. A lot of myths and folklores are very archetypical. So, example came up the other day when I was talking to somebody about the Eye Killer. It's a monster from Native American myth that had also shown up in the Fiend Folio. The Eye Killer is very much parallel to like a basilisk or a cockatrice, in that it is a animal hybrid creature. It's usually depicted as being sort of a combination between a bat or an owl and a serpent that has a gaze attack. So without having an Eye Killer stats, even if you didn't have access to any of the previous supplements or rulebooks for D&D where an Eye Killer came from, you could easily jump in and take a basilisk or a cockatrice and change that into an Eye Killer. So starting with taking a look at what is already there and seeing if it's simply just a matter of reskinning or retheming. There are many analogs in other mythologies to a unicorn. So let's say you didn't have, for whatever reason, you didn't have stats for a Kirin from Asian myth. You could use a unicorn. It's not identical, but for the purposes of your encounter, will it do the trick? Certainly, that's an option. There are many monsters in D&D already that are analogous to other monsters that exist in D&D. For all intents and purposes, many of the humanoids really could easily be interchanged as the same species, but at different levels. A bugbear is a good stand-in, for example, for a really burly orc. If you were to if you're trying to achieve something more along the lines of kind of a Warhammer fantasy style of orc, you would not be doing yourself a disservice to simply go, okay, I have orcs, and that is the standard orc. I've got bugbears, which are my black orcs or my big gnarly orcs that are the big bruisers. I've got goblins, and then I've got kobolds, which could be totally rethemed, reskinned, I should say, as snotlings. You know, if you've ever played Warhammer Fantasy Battle, you know that the goblinoids are kind of this diverse species, but they're all kind of the same critter, just bigger or smaller. And then, of course, you also got your characters like hobgoblins, who could easily be worked into that whole mix as just more disciplined, more professional orcs. But you could also just use various humans as orcs. Let's say you needed an orc warlock, but you didn't have stats for an orc warlock, and you're just doing it on the fly. You can pull open, I think it's in the back of the player's handbook, maybe the DMG, can't remember exactly specifically, where they have the list of NPCs, and just pull out a priest or a warlock or something. Say he's an orc. His stats may be slightly different than what an orcish version would actually be if you were to crunch the numbers, but for the purposes of your encounter, it would work fine. Your players aren't going to know. If he's a little weaker than an orc, well, maybe this warlock is just a little sicklier, weaker, or whatever. He's different. It's going to add variety. It's going to keep them guessing. Other creatures that are, say, analogous to other creatures in D&D is, you know, you may have heard of a creature called an osquip. Osquips are kind of big old, goofy, bucky-toothed, I believe they had 6 legs, rats. And so an osquip and a giant rat are very much on the same level as one another statistically, and you could skin them out easily. In a game I ran, I had water scorpions, which I gave them a name. I think I called them thalids or something like that. And they were statistically the same as scorpions. The players were encountering them on land, so I didn't have to worry about a swimming stat. They were infesting the waterlogged underbelly of a keep, but they weren't in water or near water when the encounter was had. And so I didn't have to worry about a swim stat or modifying them. I just used scorpions straight across, and you know, the players were happy. It was an interesting encounter. Also, keep in mind when you're looking at creatures that are analogous or equivalent to what you have in mind, don't be afraid to look outside of things that are are close. You know, so if you have a large, bulky, horned creature that you need to manifest that's relatively mundane, not magical, maybe you have like some sort of, you know, giant oxen or some sort of, you know, heavy duty prehistoric thing. Well, it may not be a mammal, like it may not be an ox, but a triceratops is going to do the trick. It's going to be really big. It's going to take a lot of hits. It's going to have the horns. It's going to have the hit points. It's going to do the job. So that is the first step. Look for things that are similar to what you want to make and see if you can just play it as is, but just telling your players that it's something different, describing it differently, interpreting it in a way that, while statistically true, is not. It was statistically the same, is thematically different. So when it comes down to starting to crunch numbers for your new creature, you want to keep in mind the last thing that I just mentioned. Don't feel that you have to build things from scratch, that you have to, you know, reinvent the wheel. If you're doing a humanoid with a magical effect, it is easy enough to find a humanoid that is the equivalent of what you need: ogre, hobgoblin, dwarf, elf, something to that effect, and make modifications to that. That's your starting point. The monster books and even the character classes or the spell effects, the spells in the books, are full of the text you will need for the mechanics of any abilities you're going to lay onto them. And this is where some people are going to scream foul and start to roll their eyes at me, because you don't really, when you're DMing, you don't have to get bogged down in challenge reading unless you're creating something to be shared across the board. Maybe you're looking to put it on DM's Guild, or maybe you're going to run it at a tournament or an organized play of some sort. You don't have to worry so much about having an accurate challenge rating. If you are adding a couple of new abilities to a creature and they are going to give it a new attack, tweak the challenge rating if you feel it's necessary, but only for the purposes of coming back to it later and worrying about the experience that you're going to award. If you're even bothering with combat-based experience or encounter-based experience. So, to kind of go with what we're doing, let's say you wanted to make some sort of fire-breathing, so a lesser dragon. Let's say you're trying to do some sort of a minor dragon, a drake of some sort, and you don't have stats for one of those, but you do have access to dinosaurs. Well, there's a dragon physically and a dinosaur are interchangeable enough, especially if you're going to go with something that is less powerful than an actual true dragon, and you're just needing to beef it up. Now, fire breathing. If you're going to give it fire breath, you could look at equivalent spells, or you could better yet, look at monsters that have breath weapons. Usually, breath weapon attacks are going to be some sort of save versus effect, or take the effects of that, or they're going to be save versus effect, or take damage. So, in this case of fire breathing, even if you can't find something that breathes fire that's on the scale of your drake, look at something that maybe spits acid or shoots lightning, something that is doing damage with its breath attack. Take the mechanic of that, change the things that are important about that. The special effect is now fire instead of, say, acid or lightning. And if it's going to be a different sort of coverage for the attack, you can easily note that down. Instead of a line of lightning, it could be a cone of fire. Maybe it horks up a big old fiery gobbet, so it's a radius attack with a range. These are easy to just plug and play. So you start with your dinosaur, you give it a fire attack. Let's say you're going to do some sort of colossal displacer creature. Okay, well, we have a displacer beast, so you know what the stats for a displacer beast are. What if you were to take the base physical stats, again, of your Triceratops and give it the displacer beast's special abilities? So it will fight heavy. It will fight hard. It will have hit points. It'll be big hit points. Dinosaurs, by the way, dinosaurs and basic animals are very good foundations for special or magical creatures. Most animals and most dinosaurs in the game, and dinosaurs are animals. That's they're the same, but some people consider them different or don't think of them when they think of animals, so I bring them up. Dinosaurs and animals are generally bunches of hit points, movement abilities, and different kinds of physical attacks. They may occasionally have some sort of vision ability. I think some of the birds have keen sight, or they might have senses, but they're a very good foundation because they don't have a lot of other powers or other abilities factored into their capabilities. So they make great foundations, great platforms to build your custom monster off of. So once you have your custom monster built, again, you're going to think about how you're going to skin it and theme it when you play it. Write some notes down about how it acts, how it behaves. So when you roll out with your Displacer Triceratops, your players aren't going to say, that's Displacer Triceratops, that is a such and such. Sometimes it's simple as just giving it a name. Giving it a name can make it completely different. You take a giant toad and you call it a gullug. This is something I did in one adventure. The gullug was what it was known locally as. It was nothing but a giant toad. Stat-wise, even when the party encountered it, they saw the gullug and they saw a giant frog. Well, for the first couple of turns, the party is wondering, what is a gullug? They're waiting for this giant toad to have some sort of an effect. But the giant toad was just a giant toad. It just had a regional name, and the players didn't recognize that. And so it wasn't until after a couple of encounters and they realized that all this thing was doing was hopping around and trying to swallow them, that it really was just a giant toad. It was described to have a rocky camouflage because it was a mountain toad, the great mountain toad. But it was statistically the same as the toad from the Monster Manual. This is 3rd edition, but still, the rules apply across the board. So whether you're reskinning or renaming, retheming something, looking for equivalency, a lot of times it is looking for equivalency. You're not just reskinning. Equivalency and retheming, reskinning are related, but they're not the same. Sometimes reskinning something is just taking something and making it a variation of what it is. A goblin is now, some sort of little grindler or whatever, and it's the same thing. You're just putting a different costume on it. Now, if you're looking for, I've got this critter, what is it like? That is equivalency. So equivalency or reskinning, retheming is always good. Now, building up off of existing creatures is really the next way to go. As far as creating from the ground up, doing something from scratch, yes, there have been countless coverages on blog posts and Facebook posts and in books and side dealies, and I'm sure there's plenty of stuff on the DM's Guild, and it's been covered in the DMG, about building monsters from the ground up. Most of that, as an experienced DM, most of that is really pointless to go through. It's absolutely a waste of your time as a DM. It's a diversion of your creative flow. And that is key. When you're designing, you want to keep your creative flow. You want to stay in the moment. You are going to get bogged down and say, screw it, and just go with the next easiest thing in the book. If you are really, unless you're one of those people who just loves the number crunch, don't derail yourself. And this is one of the things that I think stops a lot of new DMs from really venturing out and doing homebrew, is that they have a really cool monster that they want to build from the ground up. Equivalency isn't working, reskinning isn't working, or maybe they just don't want to borrow it. They want to just do so. It is literally as easy as just throwing stats together. Your players aren't going to know, and when you're running the monster, if you realize that you have made a gross misstep in the prediction of how powerful or how tough this monster was, maybe there was some synergy in its abilities that you hadn't thought of, you can always gear that down. Or maybe you missed a crucial vulnerability that is still within the theme of your critter, and so it's not until the players come up against it and you're like, okay, this is a fire-based critter. Oh my god, I forgot to give it immunity to fire. Your players are not going to know. Unless you come out and tell them, they're not going to know. Nobody's checking your math. And if they are, it doesn't matter. You're the DM. As long as everybody's having fun, it's fine. So when you're creating monsters from the ground up, by all means, feel completely free to do so. Just start building. Come up with stats. Come up with hit points. Come up with armor class. Just understand, as a DM, after a while, after a certain amount of experience, you're going to start to recognize where those things are coming from. If your creature is hard to hit, it should have either some sort of natural armor, some sort of magical armor, or it should have a really high dexterity. If your creature is hard to kill, it should have a lot of hit points. Or the other way to make things tougher without necessarily just piling more hit points on them, because hit point sinks get boring. Give it some resistances or some invulnerabilities, or just make its armor class high. But you don't have to spend a lot of time doing math. You don't have to spend a lot of time doing number crunches to get that thing to where it's going to look right to an outside set of eyes, unless that's what you're designing it for, in which case refer you back to the other resources that have already come out. But as a DM running your game for your players and for your world and for your table, or even if you're going to visit another table, don't sweat the math. You will get tired of it, you will get bored, you'll burn out, and you'll lose track of your idea. What's really most important is your creative spark and the concept you have for your critter. Now, when you're making that creature, by all means, look at other monsters and find out how the abilities have been handled for things that are common. If your monster has tentacles, don't reinvent tentacles unless there's a reason to. Look at things like displacer beasts and ropers and octopus, krakens and aboleths and things that have tentacle attacks. see how they handle their tentacles. You can use them as they are or modify them. But just because your ability isn't on a monster somewhere or isn't on a spell doesn't mean you can't write it up. What are most abilities? Most abilities are effect, saving throw, and special effect. The theme of the attack, the saving throw, or the to hit bonus, or whatever, the range, and then their effect, whether that's damage or a special ability. And with 5th edition, it's really easy because you have all the conditions laid out already ahead of time. So it's really easy to say the effect of this thing is paralyzed, it's poisoned, it's exhausted. You can just easily throw that out there and add that as an effect of your thing. You could do damage plus effect. Ghouls have damage for their attack, and then also the possibility of paralysis. So why not? Many creatures have damage plus poison. On the other hand, though, maybe this creature's effect is damage plus stunned. It's got an electrical attack, or it hits particularly hard, so hard that even if it doesn't do a lot of damage, it just rings your bell, and you're stunned. So the other thing too is remember that those conditions often have little bullet points to them that'll affect that you can strip off. Maybe it is exhaustion without this effect. Maybe it's stunned without this effect. Or maybe it's stunned with double this aspect of stunned. Or a minus to save. Save at disadvantage. Advantage and disadvantage is a great mechanic to use too. It simplifies things easily. You don't have to spend a lot of time crunching individual numbers. Back in the day when you had situational modifiers, it could get really hard to get that perfect blend of +1 or +3 in there. While 5th edition doesn't use a lot of situational modifiers, they still exist though, so don't feel like you always have to resort to advantage or disadvantage. But advantage and disadvantage is also an easy way to deal with something. If you have tentacles on a monster, and tentacles do X amount, but your monster has a crap ton of tentacles, it's just an undulating mass of tentacles like an anemone or some sort of Cthulhian nastiness, tentacle attack with advantage. It's easy. You've spelled it out. It's going to be really effective because advantage is incredibly strong as opposed to a situational modifier. So a mass of anything is amazing, is going to have an amazing effect. It's kind of like using mobs. Mobs a lot of times have advantages on their attacks because there's a bazillion of them, but they're all a bunch of little weenie creatures. So rescanning, equivalency, those are things to do. Finding a base monster and building on top of that by plugging in abilities, and then just building monsters from scratch using abilities and modifiers as you see fit are the key things to building good, interesting monsters. But the one thing that I really want to stress again, for the new DMs and stuff, new GMs who are watching this, or even the old GMs who are just maybe a little, like me, if you've been GMing for a while, I still watch tons of videos. Matt Colville, WebDM, Nerdarchy, these guys, formerly Drunkens and Dragons, now going by Runehammer. These guys are all longtime gamers. I'm a longtime gamer, but all of us still watch other videos and learn from them, and it's that community. But really, one thing to remember is at the table, nobody knows any better, so don't get bogged down in the math. Monsters are supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be interesting, and they're supposed to do a job. Kind of one last point on that in that regard, don't make Swiss Army monsters. Swiss Army monsters are boring. Your players are often going to see them as a cheat, and they're not going to stand out. They're just going to be really lame encounters. It's, once in a while you can get away with that, that lich who's like, haha, and I have this, and haha, and I planned for that, or, the demon who, seems to always have, the bat shark repellent every time he needs something. But stay away from Swiss Army monsters. Think of something that your monster does, make it do that well, give it a couple of supporting abilities to keep the players guessing, but have it focused. But yeah, I think if you take a look at your ideas, you'll often find that there's already a monster for that. You just need to give it a different look, or you can mash some stuff together and it'll work. And always lumping stuff into a stat pile is great too. You're not, unless you're going into publishing stuff or you're wanting to share stuff online and get feedback from other people, and have them take you seriously. You probably don't have to worry about the exact numbers. The key thing is, are you having fun? Are you creating a monster that your players and you are going to remember? If you are, they'll be talking about it, and that monster will probably be back in future adventures. They'll probably steal them and use them, and if they go on to DM as well. But they should be fun. So anyways, that is monsters. More about homebrewing monsters, kind of creating your own monsters. Certainly love to hear how folks go about creating their own stuff. If you want to have any thoughts or ideas or questions about the process that I use or things that you do it yourself, certainly comment below. Like, share, and subscribe. If you want to see more information on monsters, more specific things, I can always do more videos. But by all means, try it out, play around with it. Go on to Pinterest, find a monster, and sit down and make yourself a critter. As always, get out and game, have fun. Take care, guys.